Hey guys, a little bit of a delicate subject to address. Recently a couple of people have sent messages asking about an image that they've seen on the internet recently of a cafe, internet cafe in Korea with a sign on the door saying no Japanese customers allowed. It actually used a more insulting word than that, a word that a lot of Japanese people find offensive. So I won't be repeating it because that would be not cool. So there has been questions over the last couple of years from people asking about how Japanese people feel about Korean people and how Korean people feel about Japanese people and how Japanese feel about Chinese people and how Chinese people feel about Japanese people, and I've sort of stayed out of it because it's not the sort of topic I'm really keen to get into, you know, but it does get asked a lot. And so I'll start with the Korean thing, and these are just observations, what I've seen and what I've heard. And what I've seen and what I've heard from the average Japanese person is Korea is a popular place to go for holidays. So there's a lot of Japanese people that go to Korea for a holiday because it's close and it's different than Japan, but it's a comfortable place for Japanese people to go because the culture isn't radically different from Japanese culture, so they can feel comfortable there. Yeah, it's very popular tourist destination is Korea. And also I've seen Korean people in Japan on holidays. Happens. Also, a lot of Japanese people go and work in Korea because there's a lot of Japanese companies that have branches in Korea. So a lot of Japanese people go and work in Korea or go and work for Korean companies because they have some specialty the Korean company wants. And there's also a lot of Korean people that come work in Japan. So what I've observed is that the average Japanese person and the average Korean person are very comfortable with each other. No problems at all. Korean dramas are amongst the most popular dramas on TV. They're extremely popular, the Korean dramas, you know. Afternoon TV is often full of Korean dramas. So that's cool. Japanese people interested in Korean culture, they find it interesting, you know. Judging by the amount of Koreans that come here for holidays and so on, they seem to find Japanese culture interesting. So the average Korean person, the average Japanese person, no problem. But I think what we see in the media sometimes is the right-wing extremists, and you know, the media find the right-wing extremists interesting, of course. So we see, you know, Korean people protesting against Japanese people, and we see signs saying no Japanese customers, and then the reverse, we've got right-wing extremists in Japan as well that drive around in black buses with rising sun flags and, you know, chanting on megaphones for the foreigners to leave Japan, and we don't want foreigners here and all that sort of thing. So it happens, but I can't see any more of it happening here than what happens in other countries, you know. I mean, all countries have them, don't they? You know, and this sort of extends to the other questions that we get a lot too. You know, some people ask if Japanese people hold any resentment towards Americans for dropping bombs on them, you know, and the answer is yes, some do, you know, some do, but the average person doesn't. I think the average person doesn't think about foreigners at all, really. Doesn't really care either way, and then if they see a foreigner, it's sort of mildly interesting. Oh look, there's a foreigner. It's a passing thing. It's mildly interesting, and they don't give it any more thought. Same as most countries. You know, I've seen nothing here in the way people relate to this sort of thing or react to this sort of thing. I've seen nothing here that I haven't seen in other countries. You know, there's the average person doesn't give it any thought. They see a foreigner, they go, oh hello, and you know, they don't give it a thought, and it's just another person. They don't care. Same as anywhere else. And the reverse is true too. You know, I know places like Australia and America and the UK and places like that, there's some people that still have resentment. You know, I get a lot of questions about, can you interview people about World War II, and can you interview people? No, no, I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not going to interview Japanese people about World War II. I'm not going to go to America and interview Americans about killing Native Americans. I'm not going to go to Australia and interview Australians about killing Native Aboriginals, because these people weren't, the average person wasn't involved in any of that, and they don't give it any more thought than the people I just talked about. So, you know, the average Australian doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about the fact that people in the past in Australia killed Australian Aborigines, and I'm sure the average American doesn't give a lot of thought to the fact that, you know, in the past Americans killed Native Americans. It's, you know, all countries have their bad histories, and I think the average citizen doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about it unless it's relevant, unless they're sitting in a history class or something else. So, you know, yeah, the answer to the question is it's just the same as anywhere else. There's the right-wing extremists that hate anybody that's not 100% Japanese, and you might see them if you come to Japan and you spend time in the big cities. You might see the big black buses with the surprising sun flags, or you might see them on TV occasionally, some protest or something. It happens, and it can happen in other places too. I mean, very, very occasionally you might find somebody catches your eye and gives you a bit of an evil eye. It's different from, you know, I know in Australia, if you come across a racist in Australia, they're likely to hang out the window and scream at somebody, you know, go home, go back to where you came from. You know, the racists tend to be a lot more outgoing in places like Australia because, you know, they just are. And there's assaults and you know, bashings and all sorts of things. And I know that happens in a lot of countries, doesn't it? That, you know, extremists go around bashing up foreigners. It happens in Australia. I know it happens in America. I've seen it on the news and so on. That happens all around the world, I think. It does happen in Japan occasionally. Some foreigner will get a beating for something, but it's pretty rare. It is pretty rare. And you don't get racial abuse. It's not like, I know in Australia, if a foreigner, someone that's obviously, you know, a foreigner, is walking down the street, foreign tourists, you know, big cameras or something, walking down the street, you know, a bunch of Chinese tourists or something, they might get some Australians hang out the window and scream some abuse at them. It's quite possible. But you don't get that here usually. You know, these guys, if they don't like you, if they don't like foreigners, they're more likely not to say anything to you. You're likely not to even notice. So yeah, it's no different. I can't see any difference in the relationships here between Japanese people and Korean people, and Japanese people and Chinese people, and, you know, I can't see a difference between that and the relationship between German people and French people, or, you know, German people and English people, or, you know, England and America fought a war, you know. England and America fought a war, didn't they? You know, not a lot of tension there. So, yeah, the average person, you know, the extremists are extremists anywhere you go, but the average person doesn't really care. So it's the same as with the businesses. So the back to the topic was the shops. It was an internet cafe in Korea, and there was also a country club that had some signs up saying no Japanese. And what's triggered this recently is Korea and Japan are having a dispute over some small islands that they both claim ownership of, and so that's given the right-wing extremists in both countries an excuse to be all angry and, you know, carry on about it. So, but, you know, the average person really doesn't care. I'm not going to do interviews about this stuff because Japanese people don't, you know, I know in some countries if you ask people about some controversial topic, they'd be really keen to talk about it. But the Japanese people don't want controversial, you know, uncomfortable topics pushed in their faces and then have themselves put on YouTube discussing them. You know, the average Japanese person doesn't want to be into that. I'm not going to even ask. But I do ask people in conversation, tell me what you think of this. What do you think about those islands? You know, what do you think Japan should do? And the average Japanese person doesn't care. You know, they just recognise that it's a political talk about Korea, it's usually, last week I went to Korea for a holiday, you know, I spent a week in Korea, it was great. Or, you know, oh, I spent a week in China, or I went to Hong Kong on the weekend and went shopping. You know, if you hear them talking about other countries like that, that's usually what they're saying. So you'll see too, if you look at the Japan interviews, in the interview series, one of the topics was which country, and we're asking which country do you want to go to on holidays, which country you want to live in, and you can see some examples of this on there. So yeah, guys, when you see stuff like that in the media, the thing is, a story in the media about how the average Japanese person and the average Korean person just, you know, sees each other as normal people, it wouldn't make much of a news story, would it? You know, or same as with the Japan thing and the foreigners, you know, the Japanese people don't like foreigners. Can you imagine a news story that said 99.999% of Japanese businesses welcome foreigners? Would make an extremely boring story, wouldn't it? It's much more interesting to make a story about the shop in Tokyo that has a sign at the door that says no foreigners, or the onsen. Happens at onsen sometimes because they just find that foreigners don't understand how onsen work, and you know, they can make it uncomfortable for people, so there's occasionally an onsen that'll have a sign up saying no foreigners. It happens, you know, all sorts of businesses, it does happen, but you know, it'd be a 0.000 something of a percent of Japanese businesses that would do that, but it makes an interesting story, doesn't it? And with all media, they prefer to make a dramatic story than a sort of a mundane one. Wouldn't be an interesting story otherwise, would it? You know, got to make it sound exciting. So yeah, you're not likely to see it, guys. If you come to Japan on a holiday, you're not likely to see it. It's a good chance you wouldn't see any of this. It would just all be all nice and rosy, you know. Live here long term, spend a lot of time in the cities. You might see some or hear about some, but yeah, not usually. So there it is. It's the extremists pretty much that you see getting reported on the news, same as every country, right? You know, we see KKK in the States, and you know, they have racial fights in Australia between big gangs, different races fighting each other, you know, but they're the extremists. You know, the average street in Australia, you'll have people from all different countries getting together, having barbecues and drinking good beer, you know, they don't care where people are from. Everybody, Australia and America and countries like that are interesting, the new countries, because everybody in Australia is a foreigner. The only people in Australia who's not a foreigner is the Aboriginal Australians. Everybody else has come from somewhere else. Their families have come from somewhere else. America's the same, isn't it? Native Americans are the only ones that belong there. Everybody else has come from somewhere else. So everybody's a foreigner. So I think the average person doesn't care. It's only the crazies, the extremists that get all emotional about that stuff. So anyway, there it was. More videos coming soon.